You're using the wrong After Effects easing plugin. That's a clickbait title, but in this case it happens to be true, because the best easing plugin is this one here called Kease. It's so much better than all the other ones out there, and yet it's never mentioned in the lists of easing plugins, so I've just taken it upon myself to get the word out. Why is it better? So your easing plugin, right? You can load 2 keyframes, and you can add some easing. And that's what your easing plugin does. And it's not bad, but you know what your plugin can't do? Add another point and move it around. So as you can see, as I move this around, it's getting adjusted in the timeline, okay? And now we have like a more heavily weighted ease that you will never, ever be able to achieve with just 2 keyframes. So if you use an easing plugin, that right there should be enough. That should be enough to convince you to stop watching this video, go to the link in the description, and buy Kease, because it really is so much better. But let's say you don't use an easing plugin, right? Let's say you're old school. You don't need a plugin. You don't need to pay money to do that. You can just use the graph editor, right? You can just get your position, add some easing, and then you don't need help doing this, right? And that's true. For just this, you don't need a plugin. But a lot of times in animation, you need to apply the easing from one property to another. So let's say you don't need to just have this move left to right. Let's say you also need to have it rotate 90 degrees at the same time. And you need the easing on that rotation to match the easing on this position. How are you going to do that? How are you going to figure out what value this rotation should be and what the easing is? You'd have to convert between the pixels per second of the velocity to the degrees per second of the rotation. It would take you a lot of time and a lot of math. But with Kease, you just load your easing, load it into the curve, take your start and end keyframe, apply it, and then look, it figures it out. It figures out what the rotation should be, it figures out what the easing should be, and now your rotation easing perfectly matches your position easing. One click, way easier. Okay, let's talk same concept, different use case, camera moves, right? So here I have a move that kind of moves in fast and then does a slow drift. Pretty standard need, and it requires 3 keyframes. Very easy to do when you're moving directly into the center, right? Because you just have to adjust your scale. But what if you don't want to move right into the center? What if you want to move over here? To get this to not look crazy, you'd have to figure out a whole bunch of stuff. Or you just copy these easing, apply it to your position, and it works perfectly. Okay, so Kease can do 3 keyframe moves, but what about overshoots, right? So let's look at this. So I have this one star with some bounce that I like to it, right? And now I have all these other stars that I want to have a same bounce to. And as you can see, these stars have different scale, right? This is at 200, 75, 100, and they also take different amounts of times that I want them to go from 0 to their full animation. And I want to apply this same bounce to all of them. With Kease, I can just load it. You can also save your presets so you can use them later. So I load it. I just select all of these keyframes, paste it. And now they all have bounces proportional to their end size and also proportional to the amount of time you wanted it to take. And so then if you want one to be longer or shorter, you can just drag it out. Okay, but what about anticipation and overshoot? So here we have another square, just moving left to right. And here is a preset I made earlier that has some anticipation and some overshoot to it. And as you can see, the square now has anticipation and overshoot in it. And all I had to do was have the start and end keyframe in my curve. But let's say you don't want it to move in a line. What if you want it to move in a curve, right? Can it handle that? Of course, that's why I'm bringing it up. So I'm going to grab the keyframes, apply the preset, and if you see here, as it moves in the anticipation, it's taking into account the motion path for the anticipation and the overshoot. Pretty great. And now I'm going to show you a more complicated use case. So here's an animation I have with a spark that's doing some rotation and some scale. And if you look at the rotation here, I'll load it in the graph editor, you can see that it has like some drifting and then some speeding up. It's pretty complicated, right? And you'll also see the spark, it has this stroke that's just on the top right corner. And that's achieved by using trim paths on a stroke and then controlling the offset to show where it is. Now, right now, that stroke is staying on the same spot on the shape and rotating with it. But what if that's not what I want? What if I want the stroke to fight that rotation and kind of stay in the top right corner the whole time? So for that, you'd have to animate the offset. But there's all this different rotation work that we'd have to take into account. Normally, that would be a pain. But here, I can just take my start and my end frame. At the end, I would want it to be at -1. Keep it in the top right corner. Then just load my rotation curve. See it here. Paste it. And now that stroke stays in the top right corner because it perfectly fights the rotation animation. And I just want to show you something else here. So if you see the rotation in the curve editor, the rotation is positive, right? It's going from 0 to like 270, right? That's positive. The offset then is negative. It's going from -90 to -360. But Kease is okay with that. See, it's perfectly matching the easing even though one's going positive and one's going negative. So that's it. That's Kease. It is by far the best easing plugin I've ever seen. This video is over, so now you have no excuse to not just go and buy it.